Hello and welcome to today's Object Talk, which is in partnership with Bevis Marks Synagogue. As part of our partnership with the synagogue, we will be releasing object talks throughout the year to showcase objects linked to Bevis Marks, both from their collection and from the Jewish Museum London's collection. Bevis Marks Synagogue was built in 1701 as one of the first synagogues to be built in England after the Jewish resettlement in 1656. It is the oldest synagogue still in use in the United Kingdom and the oldest synagogue in continuous use in Europe. Bevis Marks is an important part of the Spanish and Portuguese community's heritage, and its collection and archive tell the story of this community in Britain. Our partnership will endeavour to bring the story to life through the exploration of key objects during this special series of object talks in partnership with the community. Today, we will be hearing from Marilyn Scott, the Heritage Advisor to the Bevis Marks Foundation. Marilyn will be talking about the NLHF project and giving a brief history to Bevis Marks Synagogue and its collection.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to speak to you today about an exciting new visitor attraction in the City of London, a brand new centre that was actually built in 1701. The new Education and Heritage Centre at Bevis Marks Synagogue has been supported by the National Lottery Heritage Fund and is due to open in September 2022. In 2019, the synagogue was awarded 2.7 million towards the costs of conservation work and a new cultural centre. The Spanish and Portuguese community at Bevis Marks Synagogue is very proud of its special relationship with the City of London. They were the first Jews allowed to resettle in the country in the mid-17th century and lived and worshipped on the eastern edge of the Square Mile. Families still connected with the synagogue today can trace their heritage back to the late 17th century. They have been allowed to practice their faith and live in peace for over 360 years. Here we can see the synagogue today. A major role for the visitor centre will be to invite people of all ages to learn the history and traditions of the Jewish religion. Learning and engagement is a key activity for the visitor centre, which will be open to all, including adult groups who can tour the synagogue and attend programmes of talks and lectures, visit the cafe and the historic displays. But in particular, young people from schools all over the UK will be invited to visit. Bevis Marks will welcome pupils from schools representing other faiths or no faith. School groups will visit the synagogue for a guided tour and then move on to the visitor centre and the displays where they will be able to understand the history of Bevis Marks in the city and its importance in the history of European religion. Bevis Marks Synagogue is located off Bevis Marks in Aldgate, and it's the oldest synagogue in the UK in continuous use and arguably in Western Europe. It was built in 1701, and it's the only synagogue in Europe that has seen continuous worship for over 300 years. This slide shows where our story began. It all began in a small synagogue in Church Lane, which was almost like a private house, dating to 1657. In October 1663, it was visited by the diarist Samuel Pepys, who recorded his impressions of the service. We know Pepys also visited in December 1659 on the occasion of a memorial service for a wealthy and respected merchant. This plaque is on Cunard House at the corner of Church Lane and Berry Street. The synagogue subsequently became a workhouse and was demolished in 1857. Outwardly, the group, who were mainly merchants, were seen as Spaniards and Catholics, but they held prayer meetings at Church Lane and were soon accepted by the government as Jews in their faith. An increase in the number of Sephardic Jews in this part of London made it necessary to find somewhere larger, and the planning of a new synagogue began, with an agreement being signed in 1699 with Joseph Avis, a Quaker, for the construction of the building, which cost £2,650. The next slide shows a painting, which is one of the only surviving items from that first synagogue. Moses and Aaron with the 10 Commandments by Aaron de Chavez from 1675. It's unusual to see Moses and Aaron in this setting when we would normally expect to see them in a Christian setting on the east wall of a church, either as a painting or as a sculpture. On to the next slide, where we see the gates which hide Bevis Marks from the highway. And many, many people have told us that they walk past these gates, having little idea what was hiding behind in this secluded courtyard. The Bevis Marks Synagogue was dedicated eventually in September 1701 and was open for worship. So let's take a step inside now. The interior decor, furnishing and layout reflect the influence of the great Portuguese synagogue of Amsterdam of 1675. Despite a fire in the 18th century, when the roof was destroyed and subsequently replaced, then the London Blitz and an IRA bomb which fell nearby. But the synagogue remains almost totally unchanged since its first building in the late 17th century. Moving to the next slide, we get a closer view of a really prominent feature of the synagogue, which is the Renaissance-style ark containing the Torah scrolls, located at the centre of the east wall of the building. The finish is unusual. It's painted to look like Italian marble, but is in fact made entirely of oak. Moving to the next slide, we see another really notable feature of the synagogue. And these are 7 hanging brass candelabra, symbolizing the 7 days of the week, and the largest representing the Sabbath. The central candelabra was donated by the Great Synagogue of Amsterdam. 12 pillars around the walls of the synagogue symbolize the 12 tribes of Israel, and they support the Ladies' Gallery. Another feature of the synagogue, which might often be missed, are a series of backless, simple benches at the rear of the synagogue. These are from the original synagogue at Church Lane. They date from 1657 and are still in use today. But now to focus on the work that is happening at the synagogue at the moment. If we look at the next slide, we will see an example of the work that was needed to be done. Clearly, because Bevis Marks is a listed building, it's an amazing survival from the early 18th century. There is not a great deal of alteration that will ever be done to Bevis Marks, but there was restoration needed, and this was to the plasterwork, to the gilding, the vital services of electrical work, heating, and this is all being carried out under the Heritage Lottery project. What's important about this work is it is being done to the highest standards of craftsmanship. And we move to the next slide, we will see how carefully this is being done. A false ceiling has been created so as the gilder can actually get up close to those finials on the ceiling and do the most amazingly delicate and detailed gilding work. Undoubtedly, the synagogue will once again look as sparkling and beautiful as it did when it opened in 1701. The work that is being done to create the visitor centre is being done in a very different part of the synagogue. It's all happening underground in the basement. And here we've got the area that formerly was used for storage and really unused, the undercroft area. And this proved to be an absolutely ideal place for some of the displays. If we move to the next slide, you can see the difficulty with the undercroft space. It was very low, and because one of the great things about the work to Bevis Marks is to increase access in terms of disability and for people for whom movement is difficult, we were obviously not going to develop a visitor centre with a very low head height. So excavation has taken place, and so the floor of the undercroft has gone down, and now it is a perfectly usable open space, but it's been a significant amount of quite hidden work. And to move on to the next slide, which really focuses on the improvements to access in the synagogue. On the left, you can see the original entrance, and a step up. When you get inside, more steps. So a ramp is being created in the courtyard, which will allow full disabled access. And you will then move through a reception area, there will be a cafe, and then moving into the visitor centre, which will very much focus on showing the wonderful treasures that belong to the synagogue. So if we move to the next slide, you can see a view now of the galleries and how the collections will be displayed. And you see there some drawers underneath the showcases. So the idea is really to have as much of the collection accessible to our visitors. So you'll be able to look at archives, at documents, and some of the other wonderful things in the collection. And then, of course, you will move down to the new space underneath, literally, the synagogue. And this will be the treasury, and it will show the wonderful vestments, it will show silver, and all of these things have been very much hidden from view for many years, and there will now be the opportunity for everybody to really enjoy this absolutely amazing collection. What we hope to do in this series of talks is to feature some of the parts of the collection and to tell more of the stories, but just really to give you a little bit of a taster. So moving on to the first of those slides. This is a wonderful spice box. The silver collection at Bevis Marks is absolutely unrivaled. It is absolutely unique in that many of the things were made for the Bevis Marks Synagogue. This spice box is Dutch, coming from the 1680s, and the workmanship is absolutely incredible. Move on to the next slide. And this is part of the wonderful collection of 18th century Torah finials or rimonim, used to decorate the Torah scrolls in the synagogue, and these will be shown in the new display in the vaults area. And the next slide. This is a slide of silver plate, but behind it, a really interesting story. There was a great feeling amongst the Bevis Marks congregation that they wanted to be integrated into the life of the city. They were not a closed community, they were a very open community. And they gave as a gift to the Lord Mayor each year a piece of silver that had been specially made for that purpose. And this was really to show how much they valued the relationship with the city, with the corporation, and with the Lord Mayor. And this is just one example, and we hope to be able to show you more in subsequent talks. And to move on to the final object, this is a fascinating OMA board. It records on a strip, adjusted daily by rollers, the number of weeks between Passover and Pentecost. And it has wonderful hand-painted flowers and designs, and then a Hebrew blessing in the centre. So many, many stories, more stories absolutely than I have time for in this talk. But as I say, we hope to be able to bring more of the stories and the objects to you in subsequent talks. We also have an incredible selection of vestments, a very, very special collection dating back to the 17th century, but coming right up to the early years of the 20th century. And some of those will also be on display in the treasury. Thank you so much for listening to the talk. We hope that that's given you an insight or a small insight into the treasures and the things that await next September. We can't wait to open and be able to show everything to you. Thank you so much for listening, and more talks in this series coming up. Goodbye.